Alright guys, so let's continue on with Walden Pond. Winter animals. When the ponds were firmly frozen, they afforded not only new and shorter routes to many points, but new views from their surfaces of the familiar landscape around them. When I crossed Flint's Pond after it was covered with snow, though I had often paddled about and skated over it, it was so unexpectedly wide and so strange that I could think of nothing but Baffin's Bay. The Lincoln Hills rose up around me at the extremity of a snowy plain in which I did not remember to have stood before, and the fishermen at an indeterminable distance over the ice, moving slowly about with their wolfish dogs, passed for sealers or Esquimaux, or in misty weather loomed like fabulous creatures, and I did not know whether they were giants or pygmies. I took this course when I went to lecture in Lincoln in the evening, traveling in no road and passing no house, between my own hut and the lecture room. In Goose Pond, which lay in my way, a colony of muskrats dwelt, and raised their cabins high above the ice, though none could be seen abroad when I crossed it. Walden, being like the rest, usually bare of snow or with only shallow and interrupted drifts on it, was my yard where I could walk freely when the snow was nearly 2 feet deep on a level elsewhere and the villagers were confined to their streets. There, far from the village street and except at very long intervals from the jingle of sleigh bells, I slid and skated, as in a vast moose yard well trodden, overhung by oak woods and solemn pines, bent down with snow or bristling with icicles. For For sounds in winter nights and often in winter days, I heard the forlorn but melodious note of a hooting owl, indefinitely far. Such a sound as the frozen earth would yield if struck with a suitable plectrum, the very lingua vernacular of Walden Pond, of Walden Wood, and quite familiar to me at last, though I never saw the bird while it was making it. I seldom opened my door on a winter evening without hearing it. Hooer, hoo, sounded sonorously, and the first 3 syllables assented somewhat like howder do, or sometimes hoo only. One night in the beginning of winter, before the pond froze over, about 9 o'clock, I was startled by the loud honking of a goose, and stepping to the door, heard the sound of their wings like a tempest in the woods as they flew low over my house. They passed over the pond toward Fairhaven, seemingly deterred from settling by my light, their commodore honking all the while with the regular beat. Suddenly, an unmistakable cat owl from very near me, with the most harsh and tremendous voice I ever heard from any inhabitant of the woods, responded at regular intervals to the goose, as if determined to expose and disgrace this intruder from Hudson's Bay by exhibiting a greater compass and volume of voice in a native, and boo-hoo him out of Concord horizon. What do you mean by alarming the citadel at this time of night consecrated to me? Do you think I am ever caught napping at such an hour, and that I have not got lungs and a larynx as well as yourself? Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. It was one of the most thrilling discords I ever heard, and yet if you had a discriminating ear, there were in it the elements of a concord such as these plains never saw nor heard. I also heard the whooping of the ice in the pond, my great bedfellow in that part of Concord, as if it were restless in its bed and would fain turn over, were troubled with flatulency and bad dreams, or I was waked by the cracking of the ground by the frost, as if someone had driven a team against my door, and in the morning would find a crack in the earth 1/4 of a mile long and 1/3 of an inch wide. Sometimes I heard the foxes as they ranged over the snow crust in moonlight nights in search of a partridge or other game, barking raggedly and demoniacally like forest dogs, as if laboring with some anxiety or seeking expression. Demoniacally? Struggling for light, and to be dogs outright and run freely in the streets. For if we take the ages into our account, may there not be a civilization going on among brutes as well as men? They seem to me to be rudimental, burrowing men still standing on their defense, awaiting their transformation. Sometimes one came near to my window, attracted by my light, barked a vulpine curse at me, and then retreated. Usually the red squirrel, Cirrus Hudsonius waked me in the dawn, coursing over the roof and up and down the sides of the house. As if sent out of the woods for this purpose, in the course of the winter I threw out half a bushel of ears of sweet corn, which had not got ripe, onto the snow crust by my door, and was amused by watching the motions of the various animals which were baited by it. In the twilight and the night the rabbits came regularly and made a hearty meal. All day long the red squirrels came and went and afforded me much entertainment by their maneuvers. One would approach at first warily through the shrub oaks, running over the snow crust by fits and starts like a leaf blown by the wind, now a few paces this way with wonderful speed and waste of energy, making inconceivable haste with his trotters, as if it were for a wager, and now as many paces that way, but never getting on more than half a rod at a time, and then suddenly pausing with a ludicrous expression and a gratuitous somerset, as if all the eyes in the universe were fixed on him, for all the motions of a squirrel, even in the most solitary recesses of the forest, imply spectators as much as those of a dancing girl, wasting more time in delay and circumspection than would have sufficed to walk the whole distance. I never saw one walk, and then suddenly, before you could say Jack Robinson, he would be in the top of a young pitch pine, winding up his clock and chiding all imaginary spectators, soliloquizing and talking to all the universe at the same time, for no reason that I could ever detect or he himself was aware of, I suspect. At length he would reach the corn, and selecting a suitable ear, brisk about in the same uncertain trigonometrical way to the topmost stick of my woodpile before my window, where he looked me in the face, and there sit for hours, supplying himself with a new ear from time to time, nibbling at first voraciously and throwing the half-naked cobs about, till at length he grew more dainty still and played with his food, tasting only the inside of the kernel, and the ear, which was held balanced over the stick by one paw, slipped from his careless grasp and fell to the ground, when he would look over at it with a ludicrous expression of uncertainty, as if suspecting that it had a life, with a mind not made up whether to get it again or a new one or be off, now thinking of corn, then listening to ear what was in the wind. So the little impudent fellow would waste many an ear in a forenoon, till at last, seizing some longer and plumper one, considerably bigger than himself, and skillfully balancing it, he would set out with it to the woods like a tiger with a buffalo, by the same zigzag course, and frequent pauses, scratching along with it as if it were too heavy for him, and falling all the while, making its fall a diagonal between a perpendicular and horizontal, being determined to put it through at any rate. A singularly frivolous and whimsical fellow, and so he would get off with it to where he lived, perhaps carry it to the top of a pine tree 40 or 50 rods distant, and I would afterwards find the cobs strewn about the woods in various directions. At length the jays arrived, whose discordant screams were heard long before, as they were warily making their approach an eighth of a mile off, and in a stealthy and sneaking manner they flit from tree to tree, nearer and nearer, and pick up the kernels which the squirrels have dropped. Then, sitting on a pitch pine bough, they attempt to swallow in their haste a kernel which is too big for their throats and chokes them, and after great labor they disgorge it, and spend an hour in the endeavor to crack it by repeated blows with their bills. They were manifestly thieves, and I had not much respect for them, but the squirrels, though at first shy, went to work as if they were taking what was their own. Meanwhile also came the chickadees and flocks, which, picking up the crumbs the squirrels had dropped, flew to the nearest twig, and placing them under their claws, hammered away at them with their little bills, as if it were an insect in the bark, till they were sufficiently reduced for their slender throats. A little flock of these titmice came daily to pick a dinner out of my woodpile or the crumbs at my door, with faint flitting, lisping notes like the tinkling of icicles in the grass, or else with sprightly day, or more rarely in spring-like days, a wiry, summery phoebe from the woodside. They were so familiar that at length one alighted on an armful of wood which I was carrying in, and pecked at the sticks without fear. I once had a sparrow alight upon my shoulder for a moment, while I was hoeing in a village garden, and I felt that I was more distinguished by that circumstance than I should have been by an epaulet I could have worn. The squirrels also grew at last to be quite familiar, and occasionally stepped upon my shoe when that was the nearest way. When the ground was not yet quite covered, and again near the end of the winter, when the snow was melted on my south hillside, and about my wood pile, the partridges came out of the woods morning and evening to feed there. Whichever side you walk in the woods, the partridge burst away on whirring wings, jarring the snow from the dry leaves and twigs on high. which comes sifting down in the sunbeams like golden dust, for this brave bird is not to be scared by winter. It is frequently covered up by drifts, and it is said sometimes plunges from on wing into the soft snow, where it remains concealed for a day or two. I used to start them in the open land also, where they had come out of the woods at sunset to bud the wild apple trees. They will come regularly every evening to particular trees where the cunning sportsman lies in wait for them, and the distant orchards next the woods suffer thus not a little. I am glad that the partridge gets fed at any rate. It is nature's own bird which lives on buds and diet drink. In dark winter mornings or in short winter afternoons, I sometimes heard a pack of hounds threading all the woods with hounding cry and help and yelp, unable to resist the instinct of the chase and the note of the hunting horn at intervals proving that man was in the rear. The woods ring again, and yet no fox bursts forth on to the open level of the pond, nor following pack pursuing their Actaeon. And perhaps at evening I see the hunters returning with a single brush trailing from their sleigh for a trophy seeking their inn. They tell me that if the fox would remain in the bosom of the frozen earth, he would be safe, or if he would run in a straight line away, no foxhound could overtake him, but having left his pursuers far behind, he stops to rest and listen till they come up. And when he runs, he circles round to his old haunts where the hunters await him. Sometimes, however, he will run upon a wall many rods and then leap off far to one side, and he appears to know what water will not retain his scent. He appears to know that water will not retain his scent. A hunter told me that he once saw a fox pursued by hounds burst out onto Walden when the ice was covered with shallow puddles, run part way across and then return to the same shore. Ere long the hounds arrived, but here they lost the scent. Sometimes a pack hunting by themselves would pass my door and circle round my house and yelp and hound without regarding me, as if afflicted by a species of madness so that nothing could divert them from pursuit. Thus they circle until they fall upon the recent trail of a fox, for a wise hound will forsake everything else for this. One day a man came to my hut from Lexington to inquire after his hound that made a large track, and had been hunting for a week by himself, but I fear that he was not the wiser for all I told him, for every time I attempted to answer his question, he interrupted me by asking, "What do you do here?" He had lost a dog, but found a man. One old hunter who has a dry tongue, who used to come to bathe in Walden once every year when the water was warmest, and at such times looked in upon me, told me that many years' age he took his gun one afternoon and went out for a cruise in Walden Wood. And as he walked the Wayland Road, he heard the cry of hounds approaching, and ere long a fox leaped the wall into the road, and as quick as thought leaped the other wall out of the road. And a swift bullet had not touched him. Some way behind came an old hound and her 3 pups in full pursuit, hunting on their own account, and disappeared again in the woods. Late in the afternoon, as he was resting in the thick woods south of Walden, he heard the voice of the hounds far over toward Fair Haven, still pursuing the fox. And on they came, their hounding cry, which made all the woods ring, sounding nearer and nearer, now from Well Meadow, now from the Baker farm. For a long time he stood still and listened to their music, so sweet to a hunter's ear, when suddenly the fox appeared, threading the solemn aisles with an easy coursing pace, whose sound was concealed by a sympathetic rustle of the leaves, swift and still, keeping the ground, leaving his pursuers far behind, and leaping upon a rock amid the woods, he sat erect and listening with his back to the hunter. For a moment compassion restrained the latter's arm, but that was a short-lived mood, and as quick as thought can follow, thought his piece was leveled and weighing, the fox rolling over the rock lay dead on the ground. The hunter still kept his place and listened to the hounds. Still on they came, and now the near woods resounded through all their aisles with their demoniac cry. At length the old hound burst into view with muzzle to the ground and snapping the air as if possessed, and ran directly to the rock. But spying the dead fox, she suddenly ceased her hounding as struck dumb with amazement, and walked round and round him in silence, and one by one her pups arrived, and like their mother were sobered into silence by the mystery. Then the hunter came forward and stood in their midst, and the mystery was solved. They waited in silence while he skinned the fox and followed the brush a while, and at length turned off into the woods again. That evening a Weston squire came to the Concord hunter's cottage to inquire for his hounds, and told how for a week they had been hunting on their own account from Weston woods. The Concord hunter told him what he knew and offered him the skin, but the other declined it and departed. He did not find his hounds that night, but the next day learned that they had crossed the river and put up at farmhouse for the night, whence, having been well fed, they took their departure early in the morning. The hunter who told me this could remember one Sam Nutting who used to hunt bears on Fairhaven ledges and exchange their skins for rum in Concord Village, who told him even that he had seen a moose there. Nutting had a famous foxhound named Burgoni. He pronounced it Bugony, which my informant used to borrow. In the Wast book of an old trader of his town who was also a captain, town clerk, and representative, I find the following entry. January 18, 1742, 3 John Melvin C.R. by 1 Gray Fox 023. They are not now found here. And in his ledger, February 7, 1743, Hezekiah Stratton has credit by half a cat skin, 01 4.5. Of course, a wild cat for Stratton was a sergeant. Of course, a wild cat for Stratton was a sergeant in the old French War and would not have got credit for hunting less noble game. Credit is given for deerskins also, and they were daily sold. One man still preserves the horns of the last deer that was killed in this vicinity, and another has told me the particulars of the hunt in which his uncle was engaged. The hunters were formerly a numerous and merry crew. I remember well one gaunt Nimrod who would catch up a leaf by the roadside and play a strain on it wilder and more melodious, if my memory serves me, than any hunting horn. At midnight, when there was a moon, I sometimes met with hounds in my path prowling about the woods, which would skulk out of my way as if afraid and stand silent amid the bushes till I had passed. Squirrels and wild mice disputed for my store of nuts. There were scores of pitch pines around my house from 1 to 4 inches in diameter, which had been gnawed by mice the previous winter. A Norwegian winter for them, for the snow lay long and deep, and they were obliged to mix a large proportion of pine bark with their other diet. These trees were alive and apparently flourishing at midsummer, and many of them had grown a foot, though completely girdled, but after another winter such were without exception dead. It is remarkable that a single mouse should thus be allowed a whole pine tree for its dinner, gnawing round instead of up and down it, but perhaps it is necessary in order to thin these trees, which are wont to grow up densely. The hares, Lepus americanus, were very familiar. One had her form under my house all winter, separated from me only by the flooring, and she startled me each morning by her hasty departure when I began to stir, thump, 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 striking her head against the floor timbers in her hurry. They used to come round my door at dusk to nibble the potato parings which I had thrown out, and were so nearly the color of the ground that they could hardly be distinguished when still. Sometimes in the twilight I alternately lost and recovered sight of one sitting motionless under my window. When I opened my door in the evening, off they would go with a squeak and a bounce. Near at hand, they only excited my pity. One evening one sat by my door 2 paces from me, at first trembling with fear, yet unwilling to move, a poor wee thing, lean and bony, with ragged ears and sharp nose, scant tail, and slender paws. It looked as if nature no longer contained the breed of nobler bloods, but stood on her last toes. Its large eyes appeared young and unhealthy, almost dropsical. I took a step, and lo, away it scud with an elastic spring over the snow crust, straightening its body and its limbs into graceful length, and soon put the forest between me and itself, the wild free venison, asserting its vigor and the dignity of nature. Not without reason was its slenderness, such then was its nature. Lepus, levips, lightfoot, some think. What is a country without rabbits and partridges? They are among the most simple and indigenous animal products, ancient and venerable families known to antiquity as to modern times. Of the very hue and substance of nature, nearest allied to leaves and to the ground, and to one another, it is either winged or it is legged. It is hardly as if you had seen a wild creature when a rabbit or a partridge burst away, only a natural one, as much to be expected as rustling leaves. The partridge and the rabbit are still sure to thrive like true natives of the soil, whatever revolutions occur. If the forest is cut off, the sprouts and bushes which spring up afford them concealment, and they become more numerous than ever. That must be a poor country indeed that does not support a hare. Our woods teem with them both, and around every swamp may be seen the partridge or rabbit walk, beset with twiggy fences and horsehair snares, which some cowboy tends. It's one of my favorite ones. One of my favorite chapters of Walden Pond. Winter animals. Peace.